I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.
It's so incredibly rare for an unlawful death to happen in our prison system. In the last 20 years, you could count them on one hand. He was asked, did he have any concerns for his safety? He said he didn't. He didn't need protection or anything like that. But unfortunately, by Friday evening, he had suffered those catastrophic injuries that he was never to recover from after the vicious assault.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. The murder of Robbie O'Connor behind the walls of Mountjoy Jail has been a shocking and rare killing of an inmate in the Irish prison system. Lured to a cell by his attackers and fatally injured in a matter of seconds, his brutal death is a reminder of the highly dangerous and volatile atmosphere that exists at all times in our jails. Today, I'm talking to Irish independent crime correspondent Ken Foy about the motives behind the murder and about the systems in place that make sure such killings are the rarest of occurrences. We discuss the perfect crime scene that was left behind for investigators and why science and not motive will prevail in solving the crime. This is Crime World, a podcast from SundayWorld.com. Ken, the investigation into Robert O'Connor's murder in Mountjoy Jail will be slightly different than if this murder happened in the outside world because it gives the detectives a little bit of time. None of the suspects are going anywhere, are they? They're all going to be locked up. It's not a case that in cases of murder investigations, often there's a fear that somebody might leave the country. This is significantly different to most.
Yes, in this very tragic and horrible case, Gardaí have said they're in absolutely no rush in relation to their investigation because, as you rightly say, the prisoners who are suspects for involvement in it are going nowhere anytime soon. The three particular people of interest are all serving lengthy jail sentences. They've all been separated from each other and other inmates, and they're expected actually to be moved out of Mountjoy to individually to different prisons. So Gardaí are in a very beneficial position from their investigative point of view, in the sense that suspects are identified, they know they're going nowhere anytime soon, and they have plenty of time to build their case. They say there's going to be no rush about questioning or arresting these suspects. They have all the time really in the world to build up all the evidence before they actually speak to the people they believe are involved in this.
And again, I suppose the crime scene is very contained. Nothing is going to happen there. It's contained within the prison. That sounds like an obvious thing to say, but, often if a crime scene is in a home, forensic officers can go in, have to get out. God knows how many people have been in and out of it. The crime scene that is the prison is a particular environment. While prisoners can walk around between cells, by and large, everyone's location is pretty much known at any one time.
Yes, and there's brilliant CCTV in Mountjoy Prison as well on the landings. And in fact, in relation to this horrific case on Friday evening, the victim, Mr. O'Connor, was seen going into the cell with one individual, and two others quickly followed in, and the whole incident lasted just a matter of a number of seconds. It's believed he was actually struck with a blunt instrument, possibly contained in a sock, and then kicked a number of times in the head while he was on the ground, suffering the fatal head injuries that he did. But at least two prison officers came upon the scene and the assault happened. But pretty much within minutes of that, the Gardaí were notified of what happened, And they were up and the whole area was sealed off. And on Friday night, a full technical examination of the area happened. And the clothes that those inmates were wearing were seized, and they're going to be undergo all kinds of forensic tests for DNA, etc. So it's the Gardaí are in a good place in relation to this investigation because, as you rightly point out, where it happened, it's unique really compared to most crime scenes, most murders that we discuss on this show.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we've loads to talk about here because I want to talk about the whole, life in prison. I suppose this really shows how dangerous prison life is, can be, and is constantly, there's tensions there all the time about to explode, how the prison management manage that and all that. But before we come to that, maybe a bit about Robert O'Connor, the victim, who he is, and maybe what sort of things are being suggested as what might have led to Friday night's murder.
Well, Robbie O'Connor, as he was known to his pals, was from the Darndale area of the city. He's like, I suppose, hundreds, if not thousands of unfortunate young men. He got sucked into a life of crime, essentially, through his drug habit. He had a number of previous convictions for a variety of offences, drug offences, stealing cars, this kind of thing. On the day that, 2 days before he was brutally attacked, he was sentenced to 6.5 years for firearms offences in Dublin Circuit Criminal Court, where he had said, or evidence was given that he was carrying around basically a murder kit, which included a loaded semi-automatic pistol, as well as 2 pairs of gloves, 2 face masks, when he was caught in Finglas last October. It was believed he was on his way to carry out a shooting against a notorious Finglas criminal, but he got 6.5 years on Wednesday for that offence, which would be his most serious run-in with the law. Previously, he would have been associated with a grouping of Coolock criminals, including a guy called John Paul Brennan, who's, I suppose, he was, you probably remember Nicola as well, about 10 or 12 years ago, he was quite a significant player in the gangland scene in North Dublin, but he's believed to now be based abroad. But Mr. O'Connor would have been associated with him, but never considered a major criminal.
God, they're quite serious, though, that he was going around with a kill kit in his car. And I have to say, I don't know about you, I hadn't heard of him, or he hadn't been on my radar before. Obviously, he's been in and out of the courts, etc. And sometimes, there's so many of these guys, you can't be aware of all of them. But he was obviously kind of up there.
Well, by the evidence that was given in court on his behalf, suggested that he agreed to move the gun in order to pay off a drug debt. But what he was caught with in that car seems to show that, he was up to something far more serious, but he wouldn't have been at the higher echelons of any criminal gang. He was a fall guy in many ways. Especially if his account is to be believed that he did what he did because he was in fear of his life, and he had this long-standing problem with drugs.
Yeah, often we discuss these cases, and I will get comments in the aftermath from people, and we have to take what's said in court as what's accepted, because that's where we're coming from. We can't, I suppose, deal with gossip or with whatever friends or foes say about people. We have to just give the facts on this show, don't we? And that's what was said about him in court, so we have to accept that. But if somebody is jailed like that, they get 60. Now, he was already in the prison system, but if a kind of an individual comes before the courts and they've been involved in whatever it is, gang crime, and they're convicted, they go into the prison system and there is this sheet drawn up of them about who they are and who those friends and foes are. In the last few years, I suppose the most significant ticks and boxes that have to be ticked by the prison service are whether people are Kinahan or Hutch. And that way it's decided where they are safe to be housed and all the rest of it. Do you have any idea, did he go in and was there a list of sort of would-be enemies within the prison service, or was he assessed as being high risk? Did he need to be put into any isolation, or was he free to kind of move around the system?
Well, initially he was free. There was no major red flags with him. But on the very day he was sentenced, he had been based after serving some time in Clover Hill, he'd been in Mountjoy for a number of months, he'd been on the A wing. But on the very day that he was sentenced, he was actually assaulted with a kettle. The prison staff deemed that he needed medical attention, which he declined. After this incident happened, now a number of prisoners have been disciplined for this assault on him, which happened last Wednesday. After this incident happened, it was decided to move him off that landing on the A wing where he was to the C landing, and for his own safety. Once he went down to the C landing, there was a number of very serious criminals there, including some linked to the Kinahan cartel. He was asked, did he have any concerns for his safety in relation to any of these other inmates that were on it? He said he didn't. He didn't need protection or anything like that. But unfortunately, by Friday evening, he had suffered those catastrophic injuries that he was never to recover from after that vicious assault. I
suppose it works two ways in the prison system. The officers within the prison service, as far as I know, they do have their own intelligence unit. So they gather kind of bits of information about who may be in danger, who's fallen out with who. But also the inmates themselves will usually volunteer the information, particularly if they feel their life is under threat. And those ones that go into protective custody that are, pretty much on their own all day in a cell, let out to eat and to exercise, they've nearly all sort of raised the red flags themselves, haven't they? Because they know, or they have been threatened, and their only way of survival is to go into this protective custody.
Yeah, well, figures that were released actually yesterday, they're fairly current. They're up to from the end of April, but there was 575 inmates in the prison system, where there's about 4,030 inmates at the moment. 575 inmates were on a protective regime, and out of that, 563 had asked to be on it. So that it generally works that the prisoner will flag it rather than the other way around. But in saying that, the prison service themselves have a very good intelligence network within the jails, and I suppose this is reflected on the fact that we're talking about a murder here that happened. It's so incredibly rare for an unlawful death to happen in our prison system. You could, in the last 20 years, you could count them on one hand. The last one before the terrible events of last Friday was in Cork Prison in 2015, when an inmate was stabbed to death in a row over a TV. And you're going back to 2006. Before that, the horrendous case of Gary Douch, who was murdered by basically a deranged prisoner in the basement of Mountjoy Prison. But so, all in all, the intelligence system that's operated by the officers within the jail generally works perfectly, considering the tensions that are in these institutions.
I mean, like, what you're dealing with is, you're talking figures, and there's thousands of prisoners in the system at the moment, and we're near capacity. But like 575 prisoners last April in protective custody, that must take a huge amount of work to sort of police that system, that they're not going to be in any place where they're going to be with a rival. It just shows really, I suppose, that prison, behind those big thick walls of Mountjoy, lies all sorts of bad relationships, people of kind of volatile nature. It must be a horrendously frightening place to exist. And we don't really sort of, people just see somebody was sentenced and they will complain they didn't get long enough or whatever. But that's just the beginning of the journey, isn't it? And really the prison system has a huge job there.
Yeah, but they have great experience as well. You referenced the Hutch-Kinahan feud, and I suppose it was a brilliant way for them to be able to organise how to keep people away from each other. And they did a fantastic job when there was murder and mayhem on the streets in 2016 and 2017. And yet you had a load of these guys from both factions involved, locked up in various different prisons in Dublin. And they were kept apart brilliantly. So the prison service, their intelligence system generally is of the highest quality.
So Robbie O'Connor hadn't sort of suggested that he was needing protective custody, hadn't requested it, while that assault was recognised. I'm sure assaults like that happen all the time, every day in prison. I'm sure there's always general sort of argy-bargy going on. But he's moved into this
C2 landing, yeah, Nicola.
C2 landing, sorry. What do you think happened there, or what sort of motives are they now looking for within what was happening with Robbie O'Connor, maybe with other people there? What sort of motives are being investigated at the moment?
Well, there's a number of different motives being investigated, but the strongest at this moment in time is that the victim himself, a close associate of his, had been assaulted on the outside, not within the jail system. And it is alleged, or it is being investigated, that Mr. O'Connor had ordered that the person who carried out that assault, who himself had ended up in prison, be attacked, be slashed across the face. Now, this attack did happen. So it's been investigated whether associates of that individual basically either paid or got these other guys to do this for a debt, because of a debt that was owed, or for various different reasons. But there's a number of other motives that are being investigated in relation to what happened, including the fact that what he was actually given a 6.5-year jail sentence for, whether a major fingerless criminal who has links to the Kinahan cartel. It is believed that O'Connor had been on his way to target a relative of this notorious criminal when he was caught by the Gardaí with the firearm. That's certainly been looked at. There's a number of other theories as well. So I think motive nowadays, especially with the level of forensics and evidence, particularly in this case, is not as important as what it might have been a murder investigation as it would have been 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, because they will be, as you say, they have the clothes of the suspects, they have the crime scene locked down, and more than likely this is going to be, if it comes to the courts, which it likely, I mean, it's almost unimaginable that it won't, but it will be a very technical case involving scientific evidence, and the motive probably might not even come into it, because there have been some murder cases, you know, I've covered in the past, largely gangland, and you're kind of left going, well, what was that about? But it's not important anymore, really, in a lot of ways to have a motive. But obviously, it's part of the, you know, public interest, maybe more so, to find a motive in this and to cover it from that fashion. Those suspects. So you're saying like they might have just been paid to do it and they didn't have any actual beef with him, personal beef with Robbie O'Connor? Well,
that certainly has been looked into, and it seems that more than likely at this stage, I suppose it is an early enough stage, that seems the most likely thing in this one.
So obviously somebody very powerful there in the background then must be either ordering that, if that is the case, and we're just speculating here, but somebody very powerful in the background or with the money is ordering or suggesting to these people that they do this, and they've either no way out of it, or I don't know. Look, my goodness, it's just such a frightening scenario that somebody would be trapped in a cell and attacked in such a way they've no way out, no matter what Robbie O'Connor did or was. It's a horrific way for any human being to die. The investigation going forward, the suspects involved is it likely they'll all be charged with murder, or will there be other charges that are being looked at? I mean, were some of them look out? Was there one individual maybe who hit him with the fatal blow? or is it likely going to be seen as an orchestrated murder, and each one involved will face the highest penalty?
I suppose a lot of work needs to be done in relation to the Garda investigation side of things on that, especially considering that the people involved in this, the people that were in that cell, are very, very, very unlikely to cooperate with any investigation. They're all very hardened criminals. But one theory, which seems to be prominent enough at the moment, is that it was one of these three that actually, was the main person in relation to the assault that struck the victim with the blunt object. And it's possible that the other two may have been just lookouts. But again, all that kind of stuff has to be distilled and investigated. And like we said earlier, the guards are in absolutely no rush with this one. And they are confident of being, despite the obvious hurdles in relation to lack of cooperation, etc., they are very confident of being able to get to the bottom of what happened.
We're rushing to get the whole story. We'll have to wait a while ourselves. The 2015 stabbing of Graham Johnson, the 42-year-old in Cork, was over a choice of what was on the telly?
It was, yeah. It seemed that there was an argument over, it was, God, when you think of it, it's so petty as well. It was an argument over switching television channels. And the killer is a guy from Dungarvan in County Waterford, a guy called Brian Veal. I think he's run into other disciplinary problems in the jail system since. But he stabbed the victim, who was from West Cork, through the heart with a carving knife, and apparently even kind of gloated at witnesses and stuff like that. So quite a nasty individual. Obviously
very intent on watching whatever programme he wanted. The Gary, actually similar enough as, well, not quite the same, but we'd often have quite hefty rows in this house about changing the television set. I don't think anybody was pulled a knife, but a different environment.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah. I'm sure you've had them yourself, Ken.
Yeah.
We're all human. We're all human. The Gary Dooch case in August 2006, that wasn't, again, an ordered. I'm really just going through these to sort of, to talk out how these were probably moments of somebody being overcome with the desire to murder, as opposed to something that's directed or that's planned in the same way as Robbie O'Connor's has. But Gary Dooch was a very unfortunate case, and he was in a holding cell, I think, with a number of other people, and was beaten or suffocated to death by another prisoner. He was,
yeah. He was put in a basement area of Mountjoy prison because he had concerns for his own safety, and he was put in there with up to half a dozen other inmates. But unfortunately for him, one of these was a guy, Stephen Egan, who was an extremely violent person who had severe mental health issues as well. And Gary Dooch suffered a terrible death. And there was a number which was witnessed by a number of other inmates who were too terrified to get involved. Ultimately, Egan was later convicted of manslaughter rather than murder because of his mindset. He was found that he had diminished responsibility.
It's a terrifying environment, really, prison, and I think people, no matter whether they feel it or not, have to go around and show a toughness. But a lot of people must be frightened in there, in the prison system. One way or another, you're surrounded by really dangerous, really violent individuals, and it sounds like it's always teetering on the edge of something exploding. I think prison officers have a really hard job as well, and that's maybe not recognised that often.
Yeah, well, they've in general, they've been doing a very, very good job in such a difficult environment, considering all the feuds that are happening and the nature of some of these criminals, particularly those that are suspected, even in relation to the murder we're talking about now, are absolutely vicious people. They're very serious. So this is the daily environment that prison officers have to work in. And I suppose it's a credit to their work that cases like this are actually so rare.
Well, maybe we'll come back to it over the coming months to see if there is kind of any clarity on exactly what maybe has been going on there. And you're going to continue reporting on it yourself anyway, Ken?
I am. I will be, Nicola.
Right, excellent. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nicola.
You've been listening to Crime World, a podcast from SundayWorld.com, produced by Ian Mullaney and edited by me, Nicola Tallant. Research assistant is Claude Amini. If you like this show and love true crime, leave us a review, or why not download the free SundayWorld.com app for lots more stories from Ireland and across the globe.